They say the wilderness has its own set of rules, its own spirits that watch from the shadows. I didn't believe that until I felt their gaze on me. 3 scary true horror stories that will give you nightmares. Camping had always been my escape from the chaos of daily life, a sanctuary of peace in an ever-noisy world. My 2 friends and I planned this trip for weeks, choosing a spot deep in the wilderness where no one else would be around. It was the kind of place you had to work to get to, with a trail winding through dense forest, far removed from cell signals or civilization. The hike to the campsite was long but rewarding. We reached a clearing surrounded by towering pines that swayed gently in the breeze, their branches casting flickering shadows in the afternoon sunlight. It was picturesque, almost unreal in its beauty. We pitched our tents in the center of the clearing and got to work building a fire before the sun set. The air smelled of pine and earth, and for a while I felt completely at ease. As dusk settled, the forest began to change. The cheerful chirping of birds and the rustle of small animals faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The shadows cast by the trees seemed longer, darker, almost alive. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine and focused on the fire, now crackling warmly against the growing chill of night. We sat around the fire, sharing ghost stories and laughing at each other's attempts to outspook one another. It was the kind of carefree joy that makes you feel invincible, like nothing in the world could touch you. But as the hours stretched on and the fire burned lower, that feeling of invincibility faded. One of my friends stopped mid-sentence, her laughter dying in her throat. "Do you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I followed her gaze to the tree line. At first I didn't see anything, just the inky black of the forest beyond our firelight. But then I saw it, a shadow, tall and unnaturally thin, standing motionless among the trees. It didn't move, didn't sway like the surrounding branches, and I had the distinct and chilling sensation that it was watching us. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. There was no response, just the heavy silence of the woods. One of my friends grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the figure. For a split second, the beam of light caught its face, or what could have been its face. It was pale, almost glowing in the darkness, with wide, hollow eyes that seemed to bore straight into me. And then it was gone, retreating into the shadows as if it had never been there. We tried to brush it off as a trick of the light or our imaginations, but the laughter didn't return. The fire crackled, the only sound in the stillness, and an unspoken agreement passed between us. It was time to go to bed. I climbed into my tent and zipped it up tightly, but sleep wouldn't come. Every sound, every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves set my nerves on edge. Just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the campsite. My heart pounded as I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, too terrified to move. The footsteps stopped directly in front of my tent, and for a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I peeked through the small mesh window. What I saw made my blood run cold. The figure was standing there, impossibly tall and gaunt, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of the dying fire. Its head was cocked to one side, as though it were studying me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and vanished into the darkness. The rest of the night was a blur of terror. The footsteps returned intermittently, circling, pausing, and then fading into the distance, only to come back again. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, we emerged from our tents, pale and shaken. In the dirt around the campfire were footprints, elongated, clawed, and unlike anything I'd ever seen. We didn't waste time packing up. We left the campsite in record time, hiking back to the trailhead in tense silence. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me when I'm alone. Whatever was in those woods wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real, and it let us leave. But I know it's still out there, waiting for the next group of campers who wander too deep into its territory. This next story is absolutely terrifying. Remember to like and subscribe for good luck. The woods were supposed to be our sanctuary, a place to escape the noise of everyday life. But something in those shadows was waiting for us, silent and hungry. I've always loved the woods, but this trip made me question if I ever wanted to step foot in one again. My friends and I had decided to camp in a national park known for its sprawling, untouched wilderness. We picked a remote area to avoid the usual tourist traffic, hiking miles from the designated trails to set up camp. The spot we chose was breathtaking. Tall trees stretching endlessly, their canopies forming a green ceiling that blocked out most of the sunlight. A gentle stream trickled nearby, its bubbling sound adding to the peaceful atmosphere. We spent the day exploring, laughing, and gathering firewood, the tranquility of nature wrapping around us like a warm blanket. Night fell quicker than we expected. After dinner, we sat around the fire, letting the glow keep the encroaching darkness at bay. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, pressing down on you until you can't help but notice every rustle, every distant snap of a twig. But nothing seemed out of place, so we shrugged it off. It was just before midnight when things changed. I had wandered a little way from the fire to refill my water bottle at the stream. The moon was bright enough to guide my way, casting silver light over the forest floor. As I crouched by the water, I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I looked up, scanning the trees. At first, I saw nothing. But then, deeper in the woods, I caught a glimpse of movement. Something tall and pale darted between the trees, almost too fast for me to process. My stomach dropped. It wasn't an animal. It was upright, humanoid. I backed away from the stream, heart hammering, and returned to the campsite as quickly as I could without running. My friends noticed my unease, but I didn't want to alarm them. I chalked it up to paranoia, a trick of the shadows. But the night had other plans. As we sat around the fire, the woods grew unnaturally quiet. Even the insects had stopped their incessant chirping. Then came the sound, faint at first, like something dragging through the underbrush. We froze, exchanging nervous glances. The dragging sound grew louder, closer, circling just outside the firelight. One of my friends, braver than the rest of us, grabbed a flashlight and aimed it toward the sound. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a shape that made my blood run cold. It was tall, far taller than any person, with elongated limbs that didn't move right. Its skin was sickly pale, almost translucent, and its eyes reflected the light like an animal's, but they were too human, too intelligent. It didn't react to the flashlight, didn't flinch or retreat. It just stood there, watching us with an unnatural stillness. Then it smiled, or at least I think it did. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, exposing rows of jagged teeth that seemed too large for its head. We didn't wait to see what it would do next. Abandoning the fire, we grabbed what we could and bolted into the woods. The path back to the trailhead was a maze in the dark, but adrenaline drove us forward. Behind us, the sound of dragging grew louder, joined by heavy, uneven footsteps. It was following us. The run through the forest was a blur of terror. Branches whipped at my face and my lungs burned from the effort, but the footsteps never faded. At one point, I turned to look back, and it was there, closer now, its limbs moving in that horrible, jerky way. Its glowing eyes were locked on me, and that twisted grin hadn't faltered. By some miracle, we reached the trailhead as dawn broke. The creature didn't follow us out of the woods, stopping just short of the clearing as if bound by some invisible barrier. We collapsed into the car, hearts racing, and drove away without looking back. Even now, I can't explain what we saw. All I know is that it was real, and it was hunting us. The woods no longer feel like a sanctuary. They feel like a trap, and I'll never set foot in them again. Sometimes the most terrifying thing about the wilderness isn't what hides in the shadows. It's what steps out of them. Camping was supposed to be a bonding trip for me and my cousins, a way to escape the daily grind and reconnect with nature. We picked a spot far off the beaten path, deep in the national forest where few people ventured. The idea was to unplug completely, relying on just ourselves and the tools we'd brought along. The first day was perfect. We hiked to a secluded clearing surrounded by towering trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. A small winding creek ran nearby, and the area had just enough flat ground to pitch our tents comfortably. The air was crisp and clean, the kind that makes you feel alive. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, we built a fire and cooked a simple dinner, talking and laughing as the woods darkened around us. Night in the forest was a different beast. The cheerful chirping of birds was replaced by the distant howls of coyotes and the rustling of unseen creatures in the underbrush. I had camped before and knew these were normal sounds, but they felt different here. Heavier somehow, more deliberate. I chalked it up to my imagination and focused on enjoying the fire. It was just after midnight when we noticed the first strange thing. One of my cousins pointed out a faint glow in the distance, deep in the woods. It was subtle, almost like the light from a lantern swaying between the trees. At first we joked about it, saying it was probably another camper or a ranger. But as we watched, the light didn't move like a person walking. It bobbed erratically, almost hovering, and it never seemed to come closer or go further away. We tried to ignore it, convincing ourselves it was just a trick of the light or some kind of firefly. But the unease lingered, growing stronger with each passing hour. The forest around us felt wrong. The fire's warmth didn't seem to reach us, and the darkness beyond our small circle of light felt impossibly deep, as though the trees were closing in. Then came the sound, soft at first, like leaves crunching underfoot. It was steady, rhythmic, and unmistakably human. Someone, or something, was walking just beyond the firelight, circling us. "Hello?" One of us called out, trying to sound braver than we felt. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment there was only silence. Then, from the shadows, a figure stepped into the dim edge of the firelight. At first glance, he seemed normal. A man in tattered clothes, his face partially obscured by a hood. But something about him was off. His movements were too stiff, almost puppet-like, and he stood too still when he stopped, as if he were waiting for something. "Lost?" one of us asked cautiously, but the man didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head like a predator studying its prey. The firelight flickered, casting strange shadows across his face, and I swear his eyes seemed too bright, too reflective, like an animal's caught in headlights. The tension was unbearable. One of my cousins grabbed a flashlight and shone it directly at him, and that's when we saw it. The truth of what we were dealing with. His skin was pale and stretched too tightly over his face, and his grin was impossibly wide, filled with jagged, yellowing teeth. He took a step forward, and his movements were unnatural, almost jerking, as if his limbs didn't fit quite right. Panic took over. We grabbed what we could, just the essentials, and bolted into the woods. The man didn't run after us, but his footsteps followed, deliberate and steady, always just behind us. Every time I glanced back, I caught glimpses of him between the trees, his glowing eyes fixed on me. We ran for what felt like hours, our lungs burning and our legs screaming in protest. Eventually, we stumbled upon a dirt road, and by some miracle, a ranger's truck appeared in the distance. We flagged him down, desperate for help, and when we told him what had happened, his face grew pale. He didn't question us, didn't tell us we were imagining things. He just drove us out of the forest as fast as he could. We never went back to retrieve our gear. Whatever was out there could keep it. To this day, I don't know who or what that man was. But I know one thing for sure, he wasn't human. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed, remember to like and subscribe for more videos.